I'm going to show you how to do the backstitch. The backstitch is a method of construction that's used to create seams, as you would, for instance, with a sewing machine, but this is the hand method, and this is pretty much how clothing was constructed for many years if it was sewn together prior to the invention of the sewing machine. Okay, you can see that there's a straight stitching line, for the most part. I did do it by hand. Alright, and then the other side looks a little bit different. The thread appears a little bit thicker, and I'll explain why in a moment. I did make it at 1/2 inch seam allowance from the edge of the fabric. And after you've completed the stitch, then you would press it open with your iron. This is what it would look like when it's all opened up and you have your seam constructed. So the backstitch. To start the backstitch, okay, I've got my thread anchored on the right hand side, again because I am right handed. I'm going to start on the right hand side and I'm going to stitch toward the left. If you're left handed, it is frequently easier to start stitches like this on the left hand side and stitch toward the right. Okay, so for the back stitch, I'm gonna start about an 1/8 of an inch away from my anchor. So here's my anchor, and here's where I'm going to put my needle into my fabric. I'm putting it in right on top of the 1/2 inch guideline that I've drawn. I drew it lightly and in pencil in order to keep my seam straight. It's a little bit easier to do that since there's no stitch guide or anything like you would use on a sewing machine. So this is my stitch guide. This is the line I'll be sewing on when I put these two pieces of fabric together. So I take my needle and I put it right into that stitch line, it's gone through both layers of fabric, and I'm going to pull the thread all the way through. Alright, then I'm going to come up from the bottom of the fabric about the same distance that I made that first stitch, so about 1/8 of an inch. You are making rather small stitches. That is the important part, is that you have relatively small, even stitches in order to make this the durable hand-sewn seam that it can be. So I come up on that line that I've drawn, bring my thread all the way through, and then I'm going to go right back down where that first stitch ended, and I'm going to pull my needle through my fabric and along with all of the slack of the thread, hopefully not getting tangled up. Okay, and then I've got my first 2 stitches. The next stitch again, come up through the other side of the fabric, about 1/8 of an inch away from your last stitch. Bring your thread all the way up. You're going to put your needle where the last stitch ended, push it through the fabric, and then pull that down. And then you just repeat this until you get to the end of your seam or until you need to replenish your thread. And for a stitch like this, I know it's going to be tempting because you will use a lot of thread with a stitch like this. It will be tempting to cut a thread that is longer than the recommended arm's length. Do not do that. Your thread will get tangled and it will get knotty even if you condition it. It'll be very frustrating if you do that. So just go slowly and steadily. Okay. Coming up through the fabric, and when you go down at the end of your last stitch. And you'll notice this one's taking much longer than some of the other stitches that we've gone over so far. And that's true. This is a time-consuming stitch, but with practice and patience, you will improve. Just keep that in mind. Nobody's born with these skills. These are strange movements for some people's hands to be making. They've never done anything like this. So keep that in mind as you're sewing, that this is going to take time and it's going to take practice. Okay, let me finish this stitch and I'll show you the other side. So, got that. I've been working, got that, 1 3/8 sewn in the last couple of minutes. All right, and this is what the back looks like. So you can, you'll see that the back overlaps the last stitch. That's why it's called a back stitch, because you're going back over the stitch that you went to previously. If you are familiar at all with counted cross stitch, for instance, or other types of embroidery, you might be familiar with this stitch or similar types of stitches. It can be used in embroidery as well as counted cross stitch. And that is your back stitch, and that is how you will be constructing your pillow for the most part, and your sock monkey project. Backstitch.